So let's jump straight into it. The current fair price of Bitcoin is sat at an impressive 46,856. Bitcoin seems to be rallying up, and this is quite the contrast to what happened over the weekend. Now, over the weekend, we had some fairly lackluster price action, with Bitcoin trading within this narrow range, which we're going to look at in a bit more depth in a second. So brace yourself as we go through this week's update. But before we do that, let's talk through some of my recent trade and to tell you exactly how I was able to get into the trade and why I jumped into the trade that I got in on Thursday. I actually got into this one whilst I was streaming, and I was able to discuss exactly why I went into this trade. So if you take a look at the previous video, we can see that the current market setting looked similar to this. So we had a high, we had a low, and we had lots of internal market structure coming up to this high over here. And what I said clearly on the video is that, well, I've actually just entered this trade, and this is the reason why. Well, what was the reason I entered the trade? First of all, we had a nice juicy trend line of liquidity that was accruing over here. If we go on the bar replay tool, we can just see this slightly clearer because this is where we actually were. This is more realistic. We had a nice trend line of liquidity, or perhaps a curve liquidity over here, whereby you've got stop losses here, stop losses there. And what's the chance that Bitcoin is going to take out that liquidity to give it some more juice or some more energy to go further up? Well, that's exactly what it did. But why did we enter the trade? Well, first of all, we engineered those stop losses. Secondly, we had some bull rejection wicks. We had some bull rejection wicks indicating that buyers are being rejected. And not just that, we spotted bearish divergence on the 12-minute. And what is bearish divergence? Well, what we can see is that as price was going up, momentum was going down. So there you have it. Those were the three reasons as to why that was an attractive trade for myself. And let's see exactly how that played out. Boom. So there we have it. We had a trade that marks down quite nicely, straight into profit immediately after entry, and take profit was hit. Now I'm currently out of that trade. I am not in any trades at the moment. So let's see what transpired as the weekend proceeded. Well, over the weekend, I'll be honest, it was quite boring price action in the sense that Bitcoin didn't really do much. It sort of traded within a very narrow range, as we can see over here. But a few things worth noticing. We can see in a minute that we had a nice trending symmetrical triangle forming. We had trends on the downside and trends on the upside. Now internally, we can also see that we have some internal trend lines that also form over the weekend. Okay, now these are quite indicative as to what Bitcoin was going to do next. And we're going to talk about some of that shortly after we look at the price action. So what we can see here is that Bitcoin was able to put in a first high. So that was where it tagged the triangle for the first time. And then it marks down, put in a low, tagged the triangle again. But at this point, what am I seeing here? Well, I'm seeing this fairly obvious trend line of liquidity. And what tends to happen to trend lines of liquidity? They tend to get run. So what happened is that we used that trend line, we used those stop losses to give us the juice to collect enough momentum to have a mark up. So that was an idea as to why we actually broke up out of the triangle. Now, with every triangle, we have a target and we have a retest. With a retest, it doesn't always happen, right? But if you're lucky, you'll get another opportunity to enter the trade. I actually didn't enter this trade, but perhaps let's look at what could have happened if you had your eyes on the charts and you were looking at the market at the time of this event. But before we do that, there are two things to be wary of. First of all is the target of this triangle. Well, to work out the target of this triangle, well, you simply draw your trend from the start of the triangle and postulate it above just where it breaks out. And what can we see? Well, we can see some very interesting things over here. First of all, we can see that the breakout target for the upside comes at around 46,813, and for the downside, we can see it's coming at around 40,786, which is similar or quite close, to our range low, our internal range low. And the high, well, there you have it. Our high is very, very, very close to our 12-hour supply. Remember, this 12-hour supply is a supply that was put in all the way in April 2022. And it's not only your 12-hour supply, it's also your value area high. Your value area high for the last bull market. Now, what did this trend line or what did this triangle tell us about what Bitcoin could potentially do? Well, first of all, we can see that we have all these supply areas or supply zones up here. Now, prior, we were expecting a potential wick or potential incision into the supply for a markdown, for a nice short trade, let's say from around here, a nice short trade from about here, perhaps there, perhaps up there. But what can we see? Based on this trend line, we can see that if we were to have a break up, based on the target of this trend line, price action says I'm going to break through all of these supply zones. I'm not going to mitigate at any point in this supply zone because my target is all the way up. So that was the first indication that Bitcoin may actually be breaking up and not reacting in any of these zones. Now, the second thing to pay attention to was the fact that because of this target, we potentially may be putting in, a higher high. We may be breaking this high for higher levels. And let's see what Bitcoin did. Well, let's first of all have a look at whether we got that retest. Let's see if we got that retest we were looking out for. So if we go on a lower time frame, I can get rid of this so it's nice and clear. We can see I'm going to get rid of this as well, so it's nice and clear. We can see that as price broke out of that resistance trend line, price came right back in for a retest before continuation to the upside. And where did that continuation to the upside stop? Well, it hit our target and it went to around 46,964. Okay, so that was our target. Now, if you were able to get into that trade, well done. For those of you that didn't get into that trade, it's not the end of the world because there will be another trade. All right, so now this brings us to Bitcoin's current position. So we can get rid of the bar replay tool and let's go back to the 2-hour. Now on the 2-hour, what can we see? What has Bitcoin done? Well, if we zoom out, we can see we had a high, a low, a high, and we've had some internal action and we've just printed out, we've printed another higher high. Let's see on the 4-hour, is that a close? On the 4-hour, we've also printed a high high. So what does this mean? Well, this is a bullish sign. This does mean that Bitcoin has printed a higher high. So the expectation of order flow is a higher low followed by a higher high. But that doesn't mean we're not going to get a retracement. And actually, if you look at it, we can see that the break here wasn't that convincing, about 2% from the previous high. And also the break here so far is just around 3%. That's quite different from what happened over here. Over here, we've got breaks of around 10, 11% coming out. Over here, we've got breaks of around, about 7% coming out. All right. So these breaks are getting smaller and smaller in size. Again, is this an indication that the weekly, lower high is in place for that markdown? Is this the indication that if we look at the weekly, we've put forward a high? Is this our lower high for some markdown? We're not quite sure. But what we can say is that the momentum is decreasing, okay? And the breaks are not as strong or as solid as they previously were. So what are we looking for in terms of our next trade? Well, our PTI number 1 is still what it was last week, which is that 12-hour supply as well as a value area high. And our PTI number 2 comes as the Fibonacci zone. The Fibonacci zone from the bull market high to the bear market low and a reaction from that zone. So let's see what Bitcoin does over the next few days. Obviously, as we enter these regions, make sure you are looking at market structure. Make sure you are seeing a clear market structure change as you enter these regions. And what do I mean by that? Well, if we take a look at the replay button, let's say this was the region Bitcoin was going to react from, we would expect to see higher highs, higher lows, high highs, potentially on the 5-minute time frame, the 10-minute time frame, the 15-minute time frame, and we expect to see a change in market direction. There are two places we can enter the trade. We can enter the trade as it breaks down here, or we can wait for that retest and enter the trade over here. Okay, so make sure you're looking for those confirmations as Bitcoin unravels what it's going to do next. The trade setup is merely one piece of the puzzle. Okay, the other crucial component is your entry. What is your entry structure? Are you looking at market structure? Are you looking at market cipher? Are you looking at RSIs? How are you entering this trade? That is the other piece of the puzzle. All right, so make sure you're looking out for the correct levels. And there you have it. That's today's Bitcoin update. And if you found this breakdown valuable, if you found it educational, you found it useful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and press the like icon so you can get more recent, more timely Bitcoin updates.